Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. One of the most pressing issues in the EU is the housing crisis. Wages are not keeping up with the rising costs of accommodation, and paying the rent is a challenge for many, never mind trying to get on the property ladder. Meanwhile, homelessness has also got worse. My guest today is the EU's first housing commissioner, although his brief also covers energy, which is a key issue as the bloc tries to become more independent. Dan Jorgensen is a Danish Social Democrat, and in Denmark he was Minister for Climate and Energy and Minister for Development, Cooperation and Global Climate Policy before taking up this energy and housing portfolio for the EU in 2024. He joins me from Brussels. Thanks so much for being on the programme, Commissioner. I'd like to start with Greenland. We're hearing from NATO and from the Trump administration that there is some sort of framework for a future deal. Is there a fear that something is now going to be negotiated over the head of Denmark?
First of all, thank you for having me in the programme. Yes, obviously, apart from being a member of the European Commission, I am also a Dane. So I am, of course, very engaged in the question about Greenland. There's one thing that's very important to say, and that is that there's no future of Greenland without the Greenlandic people and without the decisions made by the Greenlandic government and parliament deciding their own future. Also, the Danish government, since, of course, Greenland is still a part of the Danish kingdom, has a say in the future of Greenland. And I do think that the European Union has been quite strong in sending that message also across the Atlantic to President Trump that we all stand behind Greenland. The French president has also been very vocal, and we appreciate that a lot, saying that sovereignty of a nation needs to be respected.
Let's change gears and have a closer look at your portfolio. And I want us to look at some key figures on housing in Europe. There's been a 60% rise in house prices on average since 2015. And 1 in 10 Europeans are unable to pay rent or the mortgage on time. Those are the figures from the European Commission. So your affordable housing plan aims to redress this situation. But it's worth saying that you would have to basically loosen the rules for state aid in order to allow for more state intervention by national governments to make affordable housing. So how does all that actually work?
So I really very much hope that decision makers across the European Union are aware of the severity of this crisis. I think we need a huge wake-up call in Europe. If people don't have a home, if they cannot afford the most basic needs, which is a roof over their head, then of course there is a real risk that they will turn against democracy and protests. And also, what is our job as decision makers if not to help people have a good life, to provide for them with the most basic of needs. So this is an obligation, I think, for all member states, for all mayors, certainly also for us here in the European Commission. And it is true, as you imply, that in the past, the European Commission has not played a big role here. We will play now a much bigger role, and one of the things that we need to do is change the rules for when it is possible to use state aid. We want to make it easier for member states to use state aid where the market does not deliver. So this means that we can use state aid to provide more affordable housing so that also nurses, teachers and police officers are able to afford to live where they serve.
Is that going to create unfair competition, though? Because presumably some member states will have a bigger housing budget than others. So if you loosen those rules, it gives an advantage to some EU member states over others, doesn't it?
So first and foremost, obviously, it's always been the competency of the member states how much they want to use for social questions and social affairs. This also goes for housing. That is not unfair competition. That is the sovereignty of our member states. And I think if we change that fundamental principle, that would be a problem. Yeah. Second, what we're trying to do here is make sure that the EU does not stand in the way. And if we are to be honest, then in the past, some of the rules that we have had on state aid and other areas have actually made it more difficult for member states to do what it is that they wanted to do to help their populations. And we are changing that now. There's also things that we can do more proactively. So, for instance, looking at the short-term rentals. I know that in many cities in France, this is a huge challenge, and it is all across the European Union the case that short-term rentals has, in some places, turned into money factories for the people that own the buildings, crowding out normal people from their homes because there's more money to be made on short-term rentals. Yeah, and we want to do something about that problem also.
Yeah, the Spanish Prime Minister, for instance, has suggested the idea of a freeze on housing being bought up for non-residential purposes, so things like Airbnb and short stays. Are you in favor of that kind of measure?
I'm definitely open to many new ideas in this area. I think it's important to underline, though, that I don't think that we in Brussels should dictate what the different cities or member states should do. But what is our job is to make sure that the possibilities are there and list the different actions that can be used. So again, right now we're in a situation where maybe EU rules are actually sometimes doing the opposite. It's blocking member states from doing what they want to do. In the future, we want to do it differently. We want to actually provide possibilities for cities, regions, member states for controlling this. There are many different opportunities. You can put a maximum number of nights that you are allowed to rent out your home. You can differentiate between professional owners that only has these apartments or houses because they want to rent them out as short-term rentals, or normal people, so to speak, that are renting out their homes for a limited number of nights. And then you can have different rules for those two types of renters. So there are many things that we can do.
You would like to end homelessness by 2030, at least that's a goal of the Commission. But according to the European Federation of National Associations on Homelessness, they say nearly 1.3 million people in the EU are homeless, and the numbers are actually increasing in some EU member states. So is that goal slipping out of your reach?
Well, I would like to end it tomorrow, obviously. We need to do this as fast as possible. And the way we can do it is, first of all, of course, by making sure that we indeed have more homes, because that is one of the reasons why it's difficult to tackle this problem, that there simply is not enough homes out there on the market. And that, of course, then often leads to the most vulnerable people being left without roof over their head. Second, of course, thing that we need to acknowledge is that a lot of the social policies that you need to tackle this problem and address these issues are national competencies. So what we aim to do from the European Union is not just lean back and say that's up to you. No, we want to try and play a positive role by providing best practices, by showing the good examples, pointing to, for instance, a country like Finland that has applied the housing first principle, which is really a success story in fighting homelessness. And we want that success story to spread over more countries.
I'd like to ask you about energy independence, which is obviously a big theme for your portfolio. And the EU has committed itself to stopping imports of Russian liquefied natural gas by the end of 2027. Is that realistic, though, given that several European countries imported significant amounts of Russian LNG in 2025, notably France?
Yes, we have to say stop. I mean, we can no longer allow Putin to weaponize energy against us. Putin has been blackmailing member states of the European Union. And of course, probably worst of all, the money that we spend in Europe buying gas from Russia goes directly into the war chest of Putin and Kremlin, and thereby helps indirectly support the war. So for me, there's no way around this. We need to say stop. Is it realistic, you ask? Yes, I do think it is. We have managed to bring down our consumption quite significantly already, from 45% 4 years ago to between 10 and 13% today. And now we need to take the final steps.
Of course, there are two leaders, those of Hungary and Slovakia, who say they won't be bossed around by Brussels. They won't be told where they get their gas and oil from. It's a sovereign choice, according to Viktor Orbán and Robert Fico. So as a bloc, then, how do you get to this energy independence?
Well, the decision has been made, so it is no longer up to those two countries in question. This will now be made into legislation and law in all countries. That is the way our union works, that when a decision is made by qualified majority, then it happens in all member states, also the ones that do not support it. Now, I would have wished, of course, that we had unanimity behind these decisions. We don't, and that's regrettable, but nonetheless, it doesn't change the bottom line and the outcome. We will stop importing Russian gas in Europe.
We'll end it there. Thank you so much for being our guest on the program, Dan Jorgensen, the EU Commissioner for Energy and Housing. And thank you to all of you for following us here on Talking Europe. Do stay with us here on France 24.